Is it worth it to win the next election? If some of this rhetoric results in trans people being abused on the streets, is it worth it? So strong policy differences. Would a stronger line on trans rights have helped to win those by-elections, do you think?
No, I think what we need to do on trans rights, which is a very sensitive area of policy.
Is it being treated sensitively, do you think, Mr. Rowley?
I think it is being treated.
So the Prime Minister making a joke about whether a woman can have a penis or not is sensitive, is it?
Well, I think what we need to do
is that sensitive. Do you think that's sensitive?
Paul, I think what we need to make sure we do is we approach these things with sensitivity, but we also recognise that people have concerns about this, and that we bring forward guidance, we bring forward how the government approaches this in a way which is careful, but we don't abolish reality, right? We look at what is happening. We need to balance off different competing rights here, and the way to do that is to take a clear, hard look at it and make sure that the policies we bring forward work for the long term.
But if this is going to be one of the issues that's weaponised ahead of the next election, migration is another thing which people undoubtedly care about. You know, it makes perfect rational sense to talk about migration ahead of the next election. But if we're going to see rhetoric around trans rights and migrants increasingly weaponised in order to win the next election, it's not going to remain sensitive and rational, is it, that debate? It's going to get nasty.
I don't recognise the premise of your question. I don't recognise these words such as weaponised and all the rest of it. What I recognise is that people have legitimate concerns around immigration. You go and talk to people in my constituency in North East Derbyshire. They are immensely frustrated that our migration system has not worked under all parties for 20 years or so. We have a new problem with the boats that we need to try and resolve. The government is trying to do that. There's no weaponisation in that. There's no division in that. That is clear about how we've got a problem we've got to fix, and we're trying to take action to do that. There's nothing compassionate about people running the gauntlet over land and sea in order that because they arrive on a beach in the UK, they stand a better chance of getting here. Absolutely zero compassion there. People are decent and tolerant, but they want us to have secure borders. And I will do, and then my party will do, whatever is necessary to make sure that happens.
Do they bring up trans rights on the doorstep?
People want people to have plain speaking, and it is reality. I'm from the LGBT community, and the reality, Paul, is that this discussion has gone into slightly strange places on both sides, pushed by significant activist groups, and the people like me standing in the middle want to make sure that we balance competing rights here, but we also recognise that there are a series of inalienable truths. We need to be tolerant, decent, sensitive to people, but we also need to recognise that there are legitimate concerns here. And I think less listening to activists on both sides and more thinking through careful, calm and appropriate policies to make sure this works for the long term.
But it's not going to be like that, is it? If this is singled out as an issue that you do think can drive a wedge with Labour, it is going to keep coming back to whether a woman can have a penis, as we've seen the Prime Minister joke about. I'm all for the decency and the debate that you're talking about, and I totally recognise there are competing rights here. I see it all the time on Twitter if I ever mention anything about trans rights or women's rights. We see that there are really passionate views about all of this, but as a responsible government, you've got to treat this carefully, haven't you? And in all likelihood, if it's going to be weaponised ahead of the next election, the rhetoric is going to get nasty.
Well, you keep bringing in this point about weaponisation. There is no weaponisation going on. A woman can't have a penis. But what we can do is balance off that clear, factual, scientific statement with also the need to be supportive and sensitive for those people who in our society have chosen to live their lives in the way that they have. Those two things are not inalienably in tension. It is simply that activist groups want to make them in tension so they can make a whole heap of noise about the things that they are pushing.
If trans people suffer as a result, is it worth it to win the next election? If some of this rhetoric results in trans people being abused on the streets, is it worth it?
As I say, Paul, there is no intention of anybody to do anything like that. But what we've got to be clear is that a responsible government has a responsibility to balance competing rights, and no amount of shouting, no amount of screaming, no amount of emotive calls from certain sides is going to move us away from the reality that it's perfectly reasonable for people in North East Derbyshire to say there are a series of basic truths which nobody's going to abolish, however much they want to shout, however much they want to scream about it, and also that they want to be tolerant and welcoming of everybody who chooses to live their lives in the way that they choose. That is a completely reasonable thing to do, and it's time we listen less to activists and more focus on that.
Okay, Lee Rowley, thanks so much for engaging on that discussion.